Stacey. Welcome to the kitchen of my old Kentucky home. I like fall for a lot of reasons, but one of my favorite things is it's apple season. So today, both the recipes Jessica and I are doing are using apples. I'm going to be making a very traditional Kentucky stack cake, and Jessica is going to put her spin on Louisville's official cocktail using apples. Here's what we'll need for our Kentucky stack cake. 4 cups of flour, a cup each of sugar, sorghum, and buttermilk, 3/4 cup of shortening, 3 eggs, a half a teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 3 to 4 cups of apple butter, and 2 tablespoons of powdered sugar. So let's make a cake. First thing we're going to need is a sifter of some sorts. Now, when I was making cakes with my grandmothers, they had those old hand crank ones. You don't have to have that. I'm sure I don't really think it's any easier because your hand can kind of get a little tired of doing that motion. So as long as you just have a fine sieve colander, that'll work too. So we're going to take our flour, our 4 cups of flour, and put it in here. And then we're going to add the rest of our dry ingredients. So we had the baking powder, salt, and the baking soda. And believe it or not, for this recipe, and you can do it two different ways. You can kind of mix it in like that and it'll go through, or I found that this is a little quicker. It's just to keep knocking it and it'll go through. Actually, some is going off the side, isn't it? So we're going to sift this 3 times. Now, I'm not really sure why it requires 3 complete times, but I do know that sifting just helps aerate the flour, and that's going to produce more volume when it gets in the pan. So that's going to help in our stack cake recipe. That's going to help it spread out in our pan to get us some really nice flat layers. So now we have our nicely sifted flour. It's just very powdery, and we're going to start mixing the rest of the ingredients. The first thing we're going to do is going to take our cup of sugar and our 3/4 cup of shortening. You can use any kind, really. One of my brands is Crisco. And we're just going to cream this together. You can also use a hand mixer, but a stand mixer is pretty easy. And as that's mixing, you can hear me over the sound of this. This is actually, I grew up making a lot of the things that Jessica and I have shown on Bourbon and Biscuits. This is one, though, I had never made. I heard about it, I've eaten it, but I'd never made a Kentucky stack cake till I did the practice round for this particular episode. I've got to say, it's a lot of fun. I loved cooking with the sorghum, like we did in a previous episode with chicken wings. Because that sorghum, just when it is cooking, it smells amazing. So this is a cup of that. We're going to add this into our creamed mixture. Mix that up. Also about just like a medium speed. All right, I'm going to do this live and on camera and lick my fingers with a sorghum pan. Where's this? Don't worry, I'm not going to touch the batter. Okay, as that's mixing, we're going to add eggs one at a time. All right. Okay, you can tell that is looking and smelling really good. Now we're just going to alternately add in our cup of buttermilk. So we'll add a little bit of that. And then our flour mix. And we'll give this a couple mixes. Okay, I think this looks nice and mixed. Certainly got the color it did the other night when I made this. And it's got the smell too, that I wish you could smell. Okay, the next thing we're gonna do is put our stack cake batter, which, by the way, if you're used to making cakes from scratch, not out of the box, this is a little denser than what you're used to. It's not quite a cookie dough, but it's somewhere between a cookie dough and your typical cake mix. It's a little more dense, so it's gonna spread out in the pan and be more just like a really, really thick pancake, which is gonna make it very stackable. So I've got 6 cake pans. Now, When this was first being made, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the history when we were assembling it, but it was made often in a cast iron skillet on a wood stove. I didn't have 6 cast irons, nor a wood stove, so we're making it a more modern way, which is just fine. And if you don't have 6 cake pans, you can just use 3 and fill them up and then split the layers when you are stacking it. I wanted to do 6 because I wanted that nice sort of crunch, if you will, on the top of each layer. So we've got the 6, and we're just going to spray a little cooking spray in the pan so these come out nice and easy. And then we're going to do one of my favorite activities from being a little girl. I don't know why, but I loved flouring the cake pans. So we're just going to take a little extra flour, and I'm just going to put it in this first one. See how far it goes, and just kind of beat it around the sides till you get an even coat, and then tap your excess into the next pan. Now we have our 6 prepared cake pans, and as you can see, I worked this into the corners as best I could without necessarily going all the way to the sides. You can, but I like the rustic quality. I like them uniform, but I like that rustic quality of being a little not perfect as well. So now we're just going to take these 6 pans into a 350-degree oven and bake them for about 15 to 20 minutes until golden brown. Well, now we're ready for the fun part. We're going to stack this stack cake. So we've got our 6 cooled layers, and we're just going to take that first layer. You can put it, I like to use a cake pedestal and put it on any sort of serving dish that you want. I've already kind of loosened these up so they're popping out pretty nicely. I'm just going to put that first layer on. Our filling is simply going to be an apple butter, and I have chosen one. We didn't make it ourselves, although I'm going to have a recipe online as a bonus for a homemade apple butter, but we cheated this time. This is a good one. It's from the Huber Orchard, which is right across the river from Louisville in southern Indiana. It's a place that I grew up going to pick apples in the fall and pumpkins as well. So I've got this apple butter already put in here, somewhere between 3 or 4 cups, and we're really just going to see how much we need to fit the layers of the cake that we're going to stack, and you can always save this on the side for your biscuits in the morning. And apple butter is simply apples, either dried or just fresh cut, water, I've seen sugar, of course. I've seen recipes for lemon juice and vinegar. Some people like to add cinnamon, cloves, other spices in it. And you can also do the same thing with other kinds of butters. I've got a blackberry butter that I want to try making the next time I make the stack cake, because now that this is my second one, it won't be my last for sure. I love the history that I learned in researching about this. Of course, growing up here, I'd heard of a stack cake, but I'll be honest, my grandmothers didn't make them. They made jam cakes. That was our treat growing up, especially for the holidays. And as I was researching this recipe online, I found some sites where they talked about people would send in their memories of stack cakes, and it was very similar to my grandmother's jam cakes, where it was a special thing. Someone maybe died, or a wedding, or holidays. I especially like the wedding story, and this is where the Kentucky roots come in, especially Appalachia. The legend goes that a stack cake was because they couldn't afford a fancy bridal cake. Of course, this was before those were probably even a big thing. But the story goes, the families would each make a layer of a stack cake in that cast iron pan that I talked about, and they would show up for the wedding with their layers, and then they would stack them at the wedding, and the taller your cake got, wasn't maybe just the 6 layers, the taller your cake got, the more popular of a couple that you were. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, because one of the things that we're going to do with this cake is they recommend that you let this basically cure, I guess you would call it that, for 2 days, so that apple butter is going to absorb into the layers of the cake and just make it more moist and good. So I'm not sure how that worked, showing up at a wedding and waiting 2 days later. Maybe they did it in some sort of pre-rehearsal dinner kind of atmosphere, I don't know. Another origin story of this was that James Herod, the founder of Harrodsburg, brought his recipe from Pennsylvania, I believe, so used a lot of apples up there. He brought his recipe into what is now Harrodsburg, and this is why they still serve it at the Beaumont Inn in Harrodsburg. But the fallacy a little bit with that story is that might have been the 1700s, and some historians say that flour wasn't really readily available until later in the 1800s. So I don't know, but that's certainly another legend. All I know is that I've heard of stack cake growing up. I know that it's a very Kentucky thing, and it's becoming even more popular with this culinary resurgence of old Southern foodways. So I'm happy to make it, and I think that we're going to be making a lot more of these in the years to come. I've even seen a mini stack cake way that would be a cute presentation as well. So I'm going to finish these layers, and I actually have a cake that's been curing for a couple days that we're going to slice up to serve with Jessica's cocktail. So let's go check that out.
Today we're going to make a fall-inspired old-fashioned. I'm going to be using an apple cinnamon infused bourbon, black walnut bitters, brown sugar simple syrup, fresh apple slices peeled, and then apple and cinnamon to garnish. So to make this apple and cinnamon infused bourbon, I filled up mason jars about 3/4 of the way full with dried apples and then about 3 or 4 cinnamon sticks, and I topped it with bourbon and sealed them, and I let it sit for 4 days. And so when you're doing an infused bourbon, 4 days is usually about the minimum, and you can go up to about 2 weeks depending on how strong you want your flavors to be. And an old fashioned is a really good versatile cocktail because it's going to always have the same ingredients of fruit, bitters, sugar, water, and bourbon, but you can play with each of those elements to make it either seasonal or match a dish that you're trying to pair with. So let's get started on our fall fashioned. I'm going to take a couple of chunks of fresh apple slice that I've peeled, about 3 dashes of the black walnut bitters, and just a little bit of the brown sugar simple syrup. I don't like mine very sweet. That's just kind of depending on taste what you want to do there. And I wanted to use the brown sugar instead of just the white table sugar because it gives it a little bit more of that rich caramelly taste to go with the apples. And all I'm doing right now is muddling this fruit pretty well with the bitters and the simple syrup. I just wanted a little bit more of the fresh apple flavor to go along with the apples that I've been soaking in the bourbon. All right, so that's pretty well muddled and mixed together. And then I'm just gonna add 2 ounces of our infused bourbon. And when you're doing something like this, it's great to use a more inexpensive brand because you're gonna get a lot of more unique flavors when you infuse it, so you don't really need to go super high end. All right, I'm gonna use some large ice cubes for these because I don't want it to get diluted too quickly either. I'm just gonna give it a stir right in the glass. Get everything chilled down. All right, to finish this off, I am just going to garnish it with one of our cinnamon sticks for extra aromatics and an apple slice. And there's our fall fashion.
Hey Jessica, had you ever heard of a stack cake before?
I've heard of them before,
Okay.
but I've never had one before,
Okay.
and we didn't grow up with that in my family.
Right, I said my grandmother made jam cakes. I'd heard of stack cakes and I've had it, but this was actually the first 2 times I've ever made one. It was fun. I love the tradition. I love those Kentucky traditions.
Yeah, and I've seen recipes for this a lot lately, actually, on some like national culinary magazines.
Right, you sent me a link to like Garden Gun.
Yeah,
I think it's really making a comeback too because I've seen it in a couple regional restaurants, just that the old foodways of the southern states, and so I love that it's making.
And I think it's kind of visually on trend too with the kind of the whole naked cake, rustic weddings, that kind of thing too.
Speaking of rustic,
yeah,
this was very good.
Thank you.
Very rustic.
So Stacey had a good suggestion that we strain the cocktail next time for the apple bits, but it still
We're
tastes
really
really good.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of a fruit salad right
But great flavor, really great flavor.
So another really fun thing to do with an infused bourbon that you make, whether you're doing apple cinnamon or other flavors, is to make it a gift. You can do it like 4 days to 2 weeks in advance, and if you strain it out of the mason jars back into the original bottle, it's really pretty and a nice kind of semi-homemade gift.
I love that too because you don't even need to wrap it. You can just put a bow around a Kentucky bourbon bottle, right?
Absolutely.
Well, for ideas like that and great recipes like this, please continue to follow us on culinarylouisville.com, and we'll see you the next time on Bourbon
and Biscuits. Cheers.